A quiet Ohio neighborhood became the center of a disturbing mystery just days before the new year, when a well-known dentist and his wife were discovered dead inside their home. What began as a routine concern over a missed workday quickly turned into a heartbreaking crime scene involving unanswered questions, terrified children, and a community struggling to understand how such violence could happen behind closed doors. The victims were identified as Spencer Tepe, a respected dentist, and his wife, Monique Tepe. The couple lived in Columbus, Ohio, and shared two very young children together. Those children, believed to be toddlers, were found alive inside the home and physically unharmed, a detail that both relieved and deeply unsettled investigators and the public. The first sign that something was wrong came on the morning of December 30th, when Spencer failed to show up at his dental office in Athens, Ohio. According to coworkers, this was highly unusual. Spencer was known as reliable, punctual, and deeply committed to his work. When repeated calls and messages went unanswered, concern began to grow rapidly. Around 9 a.m., someone from Spencer's workplace contacted police and requested a wellness check. The caller explained that Spencer had not arrived at work, could not be reached, and that no one had heard from his wife either. They also mentioned that two small children lived in the home, raising the urgency of the situation. Police responded and arrived at the couple's residence, but no one answered the door. At that point, there were no visible signs of trouble, no broken windows, no forced entry, and no immediate reason to believe a crime had occurred. Officers eventually left the area, planning to follow up if more information came in. Not long after, friends and coworkers decided to check the house themselves. When they arrived, they knocked repeatedly on both the front and back doors. Again, there was no response from inside, but what they did hear changed everything. According to emergency calls later released, the visitors could hear children inside the home. Some reported hearing what sounded like crying or yelling. Concern turned to panic. Unsure whether to break into the house, they contacted emergency services once more and explained that children appeared to be inside alone. Police were dispatched again. Then came the call that transformed a welfare check into a murder investigation. Just minutes later, another frantic call reached 911. This time, the caller reported seeing a body inside the home. The caller described blood and a man lying near a bed, motionless. The dispatcher attempted to calm the caller while sending emergency responders to the scene immediately. As the caller remained on the line, faint sounds of children could reportedly be heard in the background, a haunting reminder that two very young lives were inside the same house where something horrific had occurred. When officers entered the home, they discovered the unthinkable. Spencer Tepe was found dead, having suffered multiple gunshot wounds. His wife, Monique Tepe, was also found deceased inside the residence, with at least one gunshot wound to her chest. Investigators confirmed that this was not a murder-suicide. There was no weapon found at the scene, and police believe a third party entered the home and carried out the attack. Even more puzzling was the fact that there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting the killer may have been let inside or had another way of accessing the house. The children were safely removed from the home and placed into protective care. While they were physically unharmed, investigators acknowledged that their presence during or after the crime added a deeply emotional layer to the case. As news spread, shock rippled through Columbus and Athens alike. Spencer was known not only as a dentist, but as someone who genuinely cared about his patients, coworkers, and family. Friends described the couple as loving, normal, and deeply connected to their community. With no suspect named, no weapon recovered, and no clear motive revealed, investigators were left with one pressing question: who would want this couple dead, and why? As investigators worked to reconstruct what happened inside the Tepe family home, one of the most critical pieces of evidence came not from surveillance footage or forensic testing, but from the 911 calls made that morning. Those recordings provide a chilling real-time glimpse into how a routine concern slowly escalated into a terrifying discovery. The first emergency call was made shortly after 9 a.m. by someone connected to Spencer Teppe's dental office. The caller calmly requested a wellness check, explaining that Spencer had not arrived at work and could not be reached by phone. While the dispatcher initially treated the situation as low risk, noting that people sometimes oversleep or miss work, the caller emphasized that this behavior was completely out of character. The caller stressed that Spencer was known for his reliability and responsibility. He managed the dental office, communicated regularly, and would never simply disappear without notice. The concern grew deeper when it was mentioned that no one could reach his wife either, and that 2 young children lived in the home. Despite the worry, there was still no indication of danger at that point. Officers were sent to the house around 9:22 a.m., but after receiving no response and seeing no obvious signs of distress, they left the scene. Less than an hour later, everything changed. Friends and coworkers who had grown increasingly anxious decided to go to the house themselves. According to later 911 calls, they knocked persistently on doors and windows. Still no response. Then they heard something that immediately raised alarm. Children inside the house. One caller told the dispatcher they could hear kids moving around and believed they heard one of them cry or yell. Panic set in. The caller asked whether they should break into the house, unsure if an emergency was unfolding inside. The dispatcher advised them to wait while police were sent back to the location. Shortly after that call, another individual connected to Spencer's workplace contacted emergency services again, confirming that multiple people were now at the house and deeply concerned. They reiterated that Spencer had been unreachable for hours and that children were believed to be alone inside. Then came the most disturbing call of all. Just minutes later, a frantic voice told the dispatcher that they had seen a body inside the home. The caller repeatedly stated there was blood and that the person appeared lifeless. The dispatcher immediately escalated the response, transferring the call to medical personnel while instructing the caller to stay on the line. As the call continued, faint sounds believed to be small children could be heard in the background. The caller explained that Spencer was lying near the bed, not moving, with visible blood nearby. When asked if he appeared to be breathing, the caller said no. When asked about drug use or medical issues, the caller firmly denied any such history. The caller estimated Spencer's age to be 37, underscoring how young he was. There was clear emotional distress in the voice, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and fear, especially as the reality of what they were seeing set in. Police dispatch recordings show officers urgently calling for backup as the severity of the situation became clear. When officers entered the home, they confirmed the worst. Both Spencer and Monique Teppe were dead. Investigators determined that Spencer had been shot multiple times, while Monique had suffered at least 1 gunshot wound. Importantly, police stated early on that this did not appear to be a murder-suicide. There was no firearm located at the scene, and the nature of the injuries suggested an outside attacker. Another detail quickly caught investigators' attention. There were no signs of forced entry. Doors and windows appeared intact, raising serious questions about how the killer entered the home. This detail immediately narrowed but did not eliminate potential theories. The children were found alive and unharmed, though officials acknowledged the emotional trauma they may have experienced. Their presence inside the home during or after the killings added urgency to the investigation and intensified public reaction. By the end of that morning, what started as a missing employee concern had turned into a full-scale homicide investigation. Police secured the scene, neighbors gathered outside, and a shaken community began asking the same question investigators were now focused on. Who came into that house, and why? As police shifted from initial response to full investigation, several troubling details began to shape the direction of the case. Among the most significant was the confirmation that there were no signs of forced entry into the TP family home. Doors and windows were intact, and there was no immediate evidence suggesting a break-in. This single fact quickly became one of the most discussed elements of the investigation. When violent crimes occur inside a residence, forced entry often provides clear clues: broken locks, shattered glass, or signs of a struggle near entrances. In this case, none of those indicators were present. Investigators believe this suggests one of several possibilities. The door may have been unlocked, the victims may have known the person who entered, or the suspect had some other way of accessing the home without leaving obvious damage. Another key issue was the absence of the murder weapon. Despite extensive searching, police did not locate a firearm inside the house. This led detectives to conclude that the killer likely brought the weapon with them and took it when they left. That detail further supports the theory that this was not a spontaneous or accidental act, but something more deliberate. Medical findings also added complexity. Spencer TP had suffered multiple gunshot wounds, while Monique TP was reported to have at least one fatal gunshot wound to the chest. Investigators have not publicly explained the difference in injuries, but experts say such details often influence how detectives interpret motive, sequence of events, and the killer's primary target. While authorities have not released full autopsy results, determining the time of death remains critical. Establishing whether the shootings occurred late at night, in the early morning hours, or closer to when the 911 calls were made could significantly narrow the list of potential suspects. It could also help confirm whether the children were asleep during the attack or awake afterward. One possible clue surfaced in police dispatch records, referencing a robbery code linked to the address. However, officials have not confirmed whether the crime was actually being investigated as a robbery or if the code was entered prematurely. Neighbors have stated that the area is generally quiet and not known for frequent criminal activity, which has led some to question whether a random home invasion is likely. That said, investigators are still treating all possibilities as open. If robbery was a motive, detectives would look closely at the condition of the home, checking for opened drawers, disturbed storage areas, missing valuables, or unusual financial activity. Bank records, credit card use, and digital transaction histories are all standard components of such investigations. Technology may also play a crucial role. The home was equipped with a Ring doorbell camera, and police are working to determine whether it captured any footage before, during, or after the crime. Additionally, authorities are reviewing nearby surveillance cameras, including a police-operated crime camera located several hundred feet from the home. Whether those cameras were operational at the time remains unclear. Digital evidence extends beyond cameras. Investigators are examining the couple's cell phones, call logs, messages, emails, and social media activity. These digital footprints can reveal whether there were threats, disputes, unusual conversations, or signs of fear leading up to the murders. Experts emphasize that cases involving no forced entry often prompt investigators to closely examine the victim's personal and professional relationships. This includes family members, close friends, coworkers, former partners, and even clients. Detectives will attempt to reconstruct the couple's recent movements and interactions over the days and weeks before their deaths. Another heartbreaking aspect of the investigation centers on the couple's two children. While they were unharmed, their presence inside the home could provide important information. Even very young children may recall sounds, voices, or movements. Specialized professionals may eventually attempt to determine whether the children witnessed or heard anything that could help establish a timeline. From a forensic standpoint, the crime scene itself offers critical evidence. Because the incident occurred indoors, investigators have an advantage in preserving potential DNA, fingerprints, footwear impressions, and gunshot residue. Shell casings, bullet fragments, and trajectories can help identify the type of weapon used, even without the gun itself. Despite all these efforts, police have remained cautious about releasing details publicly. Authorities often withhold specific information to protect the integrity of the investigation and avoid tipping off a suspect. As days pass and the community waits for answers, one thing remains clear. This was not a random misunderstanding or accident. It was a calculated act of violence, and the person responsible is still out there. As investigators continue working behind the scenes, the impact of Spencer and Monique Tepe's deaths has spread far beyond the walls of their Columbus home. Friends, coworkers, neighbors, and even patients who never met the couple personally have expressed disbelief and grief. For many, this case feels especially disturbing because of how ordinary and peaceful the family's life appeared to be. Spencer Tepe was widely respected in his profession. Colleagues described him as compassionate, dedicated, and deeply invested in his patients' well-being. At the dental practice where he worked, staff members released a heartfelt statement mourning the sudden loss of both Spencer and his wife. They emphasized how deeply he would be missed, not only as a dentist, but as a friend and teammate. Family members also shared messages online, remembering Spencer and Monique as loving, kind, and devoted parents. One post described them as the best of the best, expressing disbelief that someone could commit such a violent act against them. These public tributes have only intensified the sense of shock surrounding the case. While the community grieves, law enforcement continues piecing together what may have happened. Investigators are approaching the case methodically, knowing that early assumptions can be dangerous. At this stage, every possible motive remains on the table. One theory detectives must consider is whether the crime was targeted. The absence of forced entry, combined with the removal of the weapon, may suggest the killer had a specific reason for entering the home and harming these two individuals. In such cases, detectives often look for personal disputes, unresolved conflicts, or past interactions that may have escalated over time. Another possibility is retaliation or resentment connected to professional or personal relationships. As a dentist, Spencer interacted with many people, and investigators will carefully review whether any disputes, threats, or unusual encounters occurred. While such cases are rare, police cannot afford to dismiss any lead without thorough examination. The idea of a random home invasion has not been ruled out, but many experts believe it is less likely. Crimes of this nature, especially when children are left unharmed and nothing immediately suggests chaos or forced entry, often point toward a deliberate act rather than a spontaneous one. Still, detectives are keeping an open mind. Technology remains one of the most promising tools in the investigation. Surveillance footage, digital records, and location data could eventually reveal a suspect's movements. Even small details, such as a vehicle passing by at an unusual time or a phone connecting to a nearby cell tower, can become critical pieces of the puzzle. Police are also being careful about what information they share publicly. This silence can be frustrating for the community, but it is often intentional. Certain details are withheld so investigators can later verify confessions, identify false leads, or confirm whether a suspect has knowledge only the killer would possess. The presence of the couple's two young children continues to weigh heavily on everyone involved. While officials have confirmed the children were unharmed, the emotional consequences are impossible to ignore. Special care is being taken to ensure their safety and well-being, and authorities acknowledge that their futures have been permanently altered by this tragedy. For neighbors, the sense of security in the area has been shaken. Many residents say they never imagined something like this could happen so close to home. Some have increased home security, while others have come together to support one another, sharing information and watching out for anything suspicious. As the investigation moves forward, detectives are urging anyone with information, no matter how small it may seem, to come forward. Even details that appear insignificant could help establish timelines, identify unfamiliar faces, or confirm movements near the home. At its core, this case is not just about solving a crime. It is about seeking justice for two people whose lives were cut short and ensuring accountability for an act that left children without parents and a community searching for answers. For now, the mystery remains unsolved, but detectives continue their work, driven by the belief that truth has a way of surfacing and that those responsible will eventually be held accountable.